You know, today, we really do have it good when it comes to video games. We've got something for everybody, whether it be RPGs, first-person shooters, strategy games, sports games, you name it, we've got them. Sure, we've had some duds recently. Some pretty big duds, actually, but more often than not, when you go out and go get a game, you're gonna find something that you genuinely enjoy playing. When you think about it, there's never been a better time to be alive when it comes to liking video games. And that's why I've built a time machine. That's right, I'm going to go back in time and see what the world of video games used to be like, so I can really admire where we've come from and see how much has changed. Let me show you. Alright, well, here it is. My time machine. You can tell because it says time machine on it. I guess there's no point in waiting around. I'll see you on the other side. I think it worked. I wonder what year it is. Ooh, a newspaper. It's 1983. I wonder what the world of video games looks like. Oh no. The video game crash of 1983. It was a big deal in the world of gaming. Video games were still a new and untested product. Sure, the industry was doing pretty well at the time, but plenty of people were calling it a fad. And they were almost right. There were a lot of different factors that led into the crash, but to understand one of the big ones, we're gonna need a little perspective. For the past few generations, if you wanted to go out and buy a console, you had one of three options. Either an Xbox, a PlayStation, or whatever the hell Nintendo has out at the time. And before 2001, you used to have another option. You deserve so much better. But back in 1983, you could close your eyes and stick your hand out, and a video game console would just appear there. At the time of the crash, you could get an Atari 2600, an Atari 5200, a Bally Astrocade, the Magnavox Odyssey 2, the Intellivision, the ColecoVision, or a Vectrex. And that's just the big names. There were so many more. I'm pretty sure if you looked up market oversaturation in the dictionary, you would find the entirety of the second generation of consoles. It was bad. And what was worse is that picking between consoles was about to not be a problem for people anymore. You see, the early 80s also saw the rise of the home computer. It could do so much, including play video games. It was a no-brainer as to which to pick up. Why would I buy something that only lets me play video games when I could buy something that plays video games and also lets me do math? But of course, to no one's surprise, a major part of the video game crash was the games. The second generation of consoles brought with it the creation of third-party developers, companies that did not make consoles, but instead made games for existing consoles. Now, there were a lot of third-party developers that made good games, but there were plenty more that made not-so-good ones. I say plenty, it was a lot. The market was being flooded with mediocre cash grab games, and this eventually spread to first-party titles as well. And there are two games that are perfect examples of this. Pac-Man and E.T. for the Atari 2600. Let's start with a familiar face, shall we? Pac-Man, you know him, you love him. You could close your eyes right now and you could see the game clear as day. Well, you might want to keep them closed. Pac-Man for the Atari 2600 released back in 1982. And wow, is this game not great? I do have to say though, it's not as bad as I heard. Sure, graphically, it looks like garbage, but it still kinda looks like Pac-Man. Plus, you gotta keep in mind, this is the Atari 2600 we're talking about. What did you expect it to look like? The game does have one pretty big problem though, and that's the controls. Every time I tried to turn, it was like a 50-50 shot as to whether Pac-Man would actually turn or just keep going the direction he's going. And for a game like Pac-Man, being able to turn is kind of important. All these issues aside though, it's still Pac-Man. A less charming, less fun, lower quality version of Pac-Man. Trust me, I know what a bad Pac-Man game looks like. I own Pac-Man World 2. Funnily enough, this is actually the best-selling game on the system, selling over 7 million copies. The even funnier part was that they produced 12 million copies. That's 5 million copies that didn't sell. Overconfidence. Bingo! I got Video Game Crash bingo! And this leads us into the most infamous video game of all time. E.T. In E.T., you play as the titular extraterrestrial as he tries to find all the parts he needs to phone home. Could you tell from this? The game's map loops back around, meaning that if you walk left, eventually you'll make it all the way back to where you started. Good luck walking left uninterrupted though, because for some reason there are pits everywhere. You may be wondering, why don't you just ignore the pits? Well, there's two problems with that. The first one is, the collision detection on the pits is so sensitive that if you're like remotely close to one, you're gone. Sure, you weren't touching it. Oh well, too bad, you fell in a pit. The second problem is, you have to go in the pits anyway. That's where the parts are that you're trying to collect. They're hidden inside the pits. So you gotta go in no matter what. It sucks. Okay, so now you're stuck at the bottom of a pit. Maybe you got lucky and there was a part that you needed to collect in there, but more likely than not, you accidentally fell in. How do you get out? Do you A, climb out with your hands? B, call in a flying bicycle to get you out? Or C, extend your neck and activate your hidden flight powers? Yeah, of course it's fucking C! Oh, and don't forget that the government is trying to capture you at all times. And also, there's a timer. But like, it's not a timer because it only goes down when you're moving and it goes down faster if you do certain things. It's kind of confusing, but don't worry, because if it hits 0, Elliot just comes in and revives you. And as far as I can tell, this happens infinitely, which means that you are stuck in the hell that is E.T. the Extraterrestrial on the Atari 2600 forever! This game just sucks. If you actually know what you're doing, it can apparently be beaten pretty quickly, but awful gameplay combined with this being made well before in-game tutorials were a thing just means that it ends up being a really shitty experience. Now you may be wondering, how does a game like this even get released? Well, it's simple. You give a single person 5 weeks to make it so you can release it for the holidays. And wow, am I sure a lot of Christmases were ruined in 1982. E.T. had massive amounts of returns, which didn't help the fact that they were sitting on a lot of copies that just weren't selling. So what did Atari do? They dumped all the copies in a landfill in New Mexico. As far as the US was concerned, video games were dead. A fad that was going to be left in the past. Some companies died and others had to switch course. Hell, Atari didn't even dare re-enter the console market until 10 years later. And it didn't go well either. After 1983, it really did seem like the age of video games was over. At least, that's what everybody thought until 1985, when a little company from Japan came to save the day. Now this is a fucking video game.